questions and so many answers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Questions with Brenda. This week's guest is a very special guest, and his name is Scott King. And he's an artist, he's a designer, he's an old scooter boy from Goole. I knew him very briefly when he lived in Hull for a period, a long, long time ago. It's took me a lot of persuading to get him to get involved with 5 Questions for Brenda, but I know you'd love to hear his answers to my probing questions. So thank you, Scott. Here we go. Scott, let's get straight into it and get started with question 1. Now, all those years ago when you were a student living in Hull, and you shared a student house with 3 mucky hippies, and you spent the majority of your time crying in your bedroom with a layout pad, listening to the Mock Turtles and having fanciful thoughts about Tom the Cunt Under. Now, at that point, where did you think your life would take you?
Well, Brenda, where did I think all the angst would take me? I imagined I'd be able to channel my angst into success somehow, but certainly at the moment it doesn't feel like that. And you do realise that when you're older that nobody really wants an angsty misery, do they? Nobody wants you being fucking miserable. They want you to tell them everything's alright, and they want you to smile. So I'm sitting here now in another room 30 years later, not dissimilar to the one you described. So it's not really taken me anywhere. It's taken me geographically somewhere, but I'm still sitting in a room full of anxiety. And I haven't even got my Mock Turtles records anymore to soothe me. So maybe I've gone backwards.
So, you did your degree in Hull in graphic design, and this was in the early 90s, wasn't it? And really, it was one of the most bleak places in the country. You know, people were often just walking down the street in tears, weren't they, most of the time, and it was always raining. And then after that, you just whisked off to London. You got a job immediately at the Style Bible RD magazine, and you ultimately became the creative director. Now, what I want to know is how the fucking hell did that happen?
Well, you make it all sound very, very glamorous. What I really did was move to London and live in a bedsit, at least for a few months. And then I got a job at ID magazine. And believe it or not, I got more money on the dole than I did at ID magazine to start with. Because I got my rent paid, you see, by the dole. And so I was kind of poorer, believe it or not, for a while at least. But it was good. It was good in retrospect. And I learnt an awful lot there. One thing I definitely learnt there was not to get dressed in a hurry in the morning, because on one of the first days I was there, the end of the first week I was there, I wasn't used to getting up for work, of course. I'd been at college for 3 years, then on the dole. So I got up and I was late for work, and I pulled on my jeans, yesterday's jeans, and I couldn't find my underpants. So I thought, oh, shit, I found some new underpants from my drawer, and I got dressed, and I put my jeans on, and I rushed into work, got a bus into Covent Garden, and there was a model casting happening when I got there. I was a bit late, and there was all these very beautiful models all lined up by the office sort of door. And as soon as I went in there, I noticed they were looking at me, and I thought, my God, this must be what it's like in London. You get to meet models, and they actually find you quite attractive, and they're all looking at me. And then they started laughing. And I realised there must be something wrong, but I didn't know what. You know, my dreams were shattered very quickly. And then I looked down. And I stood at my desk was at the other end of the office. I looked down, and I noticed that I had my yesterday's underpants hanging out at the bottom of my jeans. That's why I couldn't find them. Not that I was going to put them on again, by the way. So that was my introduction to the Style Bible ID magazine. It was my first memory anyway. So it's not all as glamorous as you imagine. And I don't know what happened really. I was very lucky, I suppose. They liked my work and all that, and they gave me a job. And that was that.
Well, over your career, Scott, you've worked with loads and loads of fabulous, famous people. You've worked with Michael Clark, you worked with Morrissey, you worked with Suicide, you worked with Earl Brutus, John Grant, Pet Shop Boys. Oh, the list's endless, the Dooleys. What I want to know is there anybody you'd like to have worked with, you know, like performers, artists, musicians or whatever, and done something with them, you know, maybe the Mock Turtles?
Well, I must say, one band I always wished I'd worked with were Manic Street Preachers. I always felt I could have done something really good for Manic Street Preachers. I felt I might have understood them. So I'd like to work with them. I do fantasize about doing something about Gould, you know, where I come from. And Gavin Bryars, this great composer, is from Gould, and he's started doing things about Gould. He's very famous in that world. And I'm a fan of him. So I'd really like to do something with Gavin Bryars about Gould. Maybe a sitcom. A kind of avant-garde sitcom. Sort of art, really, like, you know, old-fashioned minimalist performance art. Some kind of Samuel Beckett-influenced sitcom about Gould with Gavin Bryars. Starring, I'm not sure who would star. Don't know, Jane McDonald? I don't know. I don't know.
Right, over the years you've continued to work and do exhibitions abroad and in the UK and everything, and you've been selling your work commercially that people can afford to buy, like this wonderful This Is Shit prints you've been doing, and piss off ones, you know, they're lovely. And but I know that a long time ago you were working for Sleaze Nation magazine, very successful magazine, and you did a cover that was fucking brilliant, and it was a picture of Cher mingled together with Che Guevara. It was fucking amazing. Anyway, we all know Charles Saatchi bought a copy. Now, what I want to know is, how did you feel at that moment when you found out that Charles Saatchi bought one?
Yeah, that's tricky, that one. I regret a lot to do with that Che Guevara image, because it started out, it was a good small thing. It was for a friend of mine who ran a gallery in Cambridge, and he wanted to give the freshest students, you know, the new students, he wanted to give them a free poster for their new, it's moving into halls or new flats or bedsits or wherever they live. And I just thought about, well, what's the greatest student poster cliche? And I thought, well, Che Guevara is obviously, in the public imagination, that's the student poster. So I decided to do some kind of take on it. And my gallery at the time was run by a man called Gregorio Magnani, Italian. And in a phone call he pronounced, with Stefan, my friend at the gallery, in a phone call he pronounced Che Guevara. And so immediately this image came up of Che Guevara. So it wasn't really my idea. And then the way I did the graphic was really nicked off a lad I used to work with when I was at ID, and he did a football fanzine where he mimicked John Walker, an old Ipswich player, stuck his face onto Che Guevara. So I put other people's ideas together. It was all stolen, and obviously the original images were stolen. And anyway, it was a good free student poster, this Che Guevara play. I mean, it had a slight politic to it, I suppose, because a lot of stuff I was doing at that time was with this Crash magazine, which was about pop into politics. So it made sense in that way, you know, this kind of emasculation of the image of Che Guevara with Cher and everything else. But political emasculation, I mean by that, not a sexual one. But when it became a magazine cover, that was also good. It was a good magazine cover, and of its time, I suppose. But it became a troublesome thing when it got to Charles Saatchi, because he wanted something. He just rang up my gallery and he wanted something unique and big. And lazily, I made it into a screen printed painting, like a Warhol-esque kind of thing. And there's lots of things within that, of course, selling, there's lots of horrible ironies, isn't there? You know, you've got Che Guevara going to Charles Saatchi, this once meaningful image, kind of reduced by me to be meaningless, and then finally to Saatchi and, what he did for Mrs. Thatcher and everything else. So it's all a bit wrong. But from an artistic point of view, a creative point of view, what was really wrong was me lazily making that image into a big painting, because I should have made it into a gigantic T-shirt. I think if I had done because the Che Guevara idea is really just like a seaside T-shirt, and it's like a low pun, and I love all that crap, seaside T-shirts. And so I'm not ashamed of that, but I should have left it as a T-shirt. I should have made a 20-foot tall T-shirt, because Saatchi wore big shirts anyway, didn't he? And I could have made it into a gigantic shirt for him, which was, 10 times too big for him, which kind of would have been a comment on him and his shirts, I guess, as well. But anyway, so it's very complicated for me, that. So I think that image, I've tried to deny its existence, really. I never talk about it unless provoked, like by you, Brenda. Anyway, so I'm glad you like it, but for me, it's been more of a pain than anything, frankly.
Can you believe it, Scott? Question 5 already. It's flown by asking you questions. Honestly, I've had the most wonderful time. My heart is literally swelling to the point of almost bursting. I've had such a nice time. So, thanks again. But before we go, I just need to ask you one final question, which is very similar in content to questions I've asked of my guests. Right, so if you can just picture that little boy sat in a tiny box bedroom with the door closed, looking wistfully at the sky, listening to his 7-inch jam singles, looking at pictures in magazines and Lambrettas. If you could knock on that door and slowly open it and say something to that little boy, what would you say to him?
What would I say to that young boy? Well, I'd say, before you move to London, untuck your jumper from your jeans. That would be my main piece of advice, because that was my first mistake. They didn't like that. And secondly, I would have said, don't worry about it. Who cares? Try and be happy. Tuck your jumper in if you want. It's your jumper, isn't it?
Scott, just want to thank you so much for coming and joining us today. Tell us a bit about your life and your work and your dreams and your hopes, and the dreams and hopes that were dashed and those that rose again. So, thanks again. Thank you, Scott.
Well, thank you, Brenda. Send my love to Tongue the Cunt Underwater and all the people in Hull. And have a lovely night if you're out tonight in Hull. Okay, bye.